Today's topic, ready? Wait for it. It is closing costs. Now, important closing costs are to your client. When it comes to closing costs, the lender will be the one that's typically handling all those fees, all right? Most of the closing costs come from the lender. So you as a real estate agent don't have to worry about that there. However, let me give you an example. Sometimes your client, let's assume your client is the buyer. Sometimes your buyer may not have enough money to close a deal because he doesn't have the money for the closing costs. Let's assume you're showing a buyer property, right? You got a buyer, yeah, you're happy. It's your first buyer, your first customer, your first client, your first principal. It's going to be your first time out in the field. So you're out showing them property and you guys are having a good time and you're getting to know each other. And you make the offer. Offer gets accepted. You open escrow. Yes, life is good. Everything's going good. Your buyer sits down with the lender. The lender looks at your buyer and reminds your buyer that the buyer is getting an FHA loan. All right, so your buyer is getting an FHA loan, which requires 3.5% down payment. Now let's assume the house is $600,000. Do the math. $600,000 times 3.5%. We're going to put that total here. Buyer has to come in with that money. Now on this side, put it on the screen, we're going to have the closing costs required. Now what is the closing costs? Now the closing costs are fees needed to be paid to get this transaction closed. We're talking fees like the lender's fees, we're talking fees like the escrow fees, we're talking title fees, we're talking all kinds of fees. That goes in this pot over here. You got your down payment of 3.5%. and you got your closing cost fees over here. Two complete separate pots. Now how much are the typical closing costs when it comes to this pot over here? Now typically it's 3% of the purchase price. Typically, when you gather all the fees involved in buying a house, it comes up to about 3%. That goes over here. Again, reminder over here, 3.5% for the down payment. Don't get them confused. Now, in many cases, the buyers don't have the entire 6.5%, 3.5 and the 3%. They have the 3.5 for down payment, but they don't have the closing cost amount. So what do? What can we do? Think about that. The buyer doesn't have enough money to close the deal. What the buyers can do is say, hey, seller, they can request it from the seller. Hey, seller, I'm going to make you this offer of $600,000, but the only way I can go into an escrow and close this deal is if you help me out by paying my closing costs. Whether it be paying all of it, whether it be paying 1% of it, whether it be paying 2%, whether it be paying the whole thing, the whole 3%. The buyer's actually going to ask the seller, hey, seller, I'm going to make you an offer on your property. I'm going to give you $600,000, exactly what you want. But the only way I can close a deal is if you help me out by paying some of my closing costs. I'm going to give you money on your house, but you have to give me money for my closing costs. I mean, it almost sounds unusual, but that's how it works. Now let's discuss this. When is that going to be feasible? When is it feasible? When is it reasonable for a buyer to ask a seller, hey seller, how you doing? Would you mind giving me back some money? Would you mind paying my closing costs? What type of market do we have to be in for that to be reasonable? That the seller's going to say, yeah, okay, I'll give you the 3% you need to close this deal. Yeah, I'll give you back money. The seller's saying to the buyer, yeah, here, I'll give you some money to close your deal. What kind of market do we have to be in for that to even occur? That's right, a buyer's market. Now, what is a buyer's market? A buyer's market is when there's so much inventory out there. There's so many houses for sale and a seller is having trouble selling their house. They're desperate and they're saying, hey, whoever makes me an offer, I'll pay their closing costs. So whenever there's a buyer's market, the buyer has the advantage. So closing costs, they're there, they exist. The seller has their closing costs, the buyer has their closing costs. Now it's a matter of who's going to pay them. Is the buyer going to pay him or is the seller going to pay him? This is a great negotiating time for the real estate agent. If the buyer doesn't have a substantial amount of money to close a deal, they're short on their closing costs. As an agent, you can just say, well, hold on, buyer, we might still have an opportunity to buy a house. We'll just request that the seller pay your closing costs. Are you with me? Does that make sense? This is the deal. If the buyer is short and the buyer says, you know what, I don't have enough money, I'm short on cash. I got enough for the down payment, but I do not have enough for those closing costs. You as an agent, knowing the market is slow, can say, don't sweat it, buyer. As long as you got your down payment that the lender requires, let me request the closing costs to be paid by the seller. I'll get in my car, let's go see some property. Let's talk about today's economy. Is it slow? Is it fast? What's going on? Does the buyer have the advantage? Does the seller have the advantage? You tell me. Because there is no inventory, the seller has the advantage. So the seller says, hey, I got something everybody wants. So when there's very little of something, it's worth a lot more than before. Gold. A little bit of gold, worth a lot. A little bit of diamonds in the world, worth a lot. When there's a very few amount of homes for sale, worth a lot. The value increases. In today's market, every house for sale typically has multiple offers. You think the seller's going to have to pay any of these closing costs for any of these people? No. Hope that makes sense to you. So please remember, depending on the market, you might be able to assist your buyer in buying a house even though they don't have enough money for the closing costs. Who's going to pay for it? Who can you request pay for it? That's right, the seller.